Hello and welcome to the second session of our brand new CPD programme for primary teachers called CreatED. It's really nice to see you here again, to the people who have been before, and welcome back to you. And thanks so much for coming along. I'm Charlotte and I'm one of the area managers here at Culture Bridge North East. And for those of you who don't know who we are, a little bit about us. Culture Bridge North East is our council's bridge organisation for the North East, and our mission is to connect the cultural and education sectors together so that children and young people have access to great cultural education. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and hand over to our facilitators for the day. As always, we have Jean Hale and Claire King, our leaders on the Creative Classrooms programme. And we're also joined today by Rob Kitchen from Sage Gateshead and Sinead Williams from Ravenswood Primary. So I'll hand over now to Rob, and I hope everybody has a really good session.
Yeah, my name's Rob Kitchen. I look after the schools programme at Sage Gateshead, and I've also recently started a role supporting Gateshead Music Service as their assistant manager. And I would sort of say I'm a primary music specialist, although I do work across many areas. But over the last sort of 10 years, I've spent a lot of time working and teaching in primary schools. And I've worked a lot recently with the Eastbourne Learning Trust. And today I'm just sort of sharing some ideas and thoughts around how I've been working with Ravenswood. So I'm just going to introduce you to Sinead from Ravenswood.
Hiya, so I'm Sinead. I work in early years at Ravenswood Primary School, but I'm also the music coordinator, and I just like all things music, so I'm kind of liaise with Rob and make sure that he's not getting wrong off everybody, and that he knows what he's doing.
So today what I'm wanting to sort of look at is the learning that comes from effective partnership work between schools and cultural organisations. So I found that when I've been working in the Eastbourne Learning Trust, and particularly in Ravenswood, is that we have sort of quite a unique dialogue, and I want to sort of share what's come out from that dialogue. Okay, so we're going to look at the creation of Ravenswood's music room today. We're going to have a little conversation about progression maps and the music curriculum and how we've worked on that together. And we're just going to explore what it's like working in partnership together and just have a little chat about how we communicate and how we sort of, I suppose, work formally and informally together between the two organizations. I think the main thing to sort of take from this is, like, we're not saying that we have the answers, that we're doing it right. It's more just saying this is how we work. This is, and I think that's the effective part of what we're doing, is that it's partnership work. And also just that we're always learning. So there's certain things today that we'll share, but we'll probably re-look at and adapt and change, certainly when it comes to thinking about progression maps. The other thing I'd like to just say is we'll look at a point, and then we'll probably just go into breakout rooms and be able to give you a chance to chat to the other teachers here, and then come back with some sort of ideas about what you noticed, what are your thoughts about what you've seen, what's happening in your school. And then if you can come back with some questions for us, that would be great. This is meant to be a conversation. It's meant to be a sort of a discursive piece of training. It's not meant to be just me and Sinead rambling at you. So to kick off, here's a little photo of the music room at Ravenswood. This was a really unique space that was created. It's the first time when I've worked in hundreds of schools, and it was the first time where I had a head teacher who said, right, you can have a music room. What do you want in it? You've got free reign. And what was amazing is the space I was presented was a really massive space. It allows us, if we just look around the space, there's loads of space for us to work in a circle, which is, important for me as part of my practice. There's space for us if we need to do desk space all the way around the edge of the room. There's desks that we can use. The instruments are accessible. We have access to Apple TV and the projector, so I can get onto YouTube. I can screen if we're working on iPads. I can share and demonstrate what each child in the class is using. I think also what was really special is we worked with an artist called Paul Martin, who's was the Arts Awards lead at Sage Gateshead, and he came in and worked with a group of young people to create the big piece that we have on the wall. What's great about this space is it's about sort of transforming children and young people into their imaginations and seeing themselves as artists as they come into the room. they're modeling being a professional musician, the fact that they've got a stage at the end. Also, the fact the piece really sort of makes the space more informal. It's like the type of space you would imagine if you were going into I don't know, a nightclub or a music venue. I feel like also it makes the informality of it makes it a more inclusive space. So they're the three words that sort of stand out for us. Sinead, do you want to chat about your thoughts on the space?
Yeah, so this part of the school is right at the sort of forgotten end of the school. There's not many classrooms around here. You've got like double doors. So it was kind of a space that nobody really used. It used to be for the IT. So it used to be like the computer room. But obviously, as time got on and we got new equipment, we were able to have the IT in actual classrooms. So it was kind of a dead space. So when Clive, the head teacher, suggested having a specific area for music, we were like really excited about it. Singing's always been a massive thing here at Ravenswood. However, the sort of music and musical instruments wasn't that big. It was kind of, if you had the money to have like private music lessons, then you played music, but it wasn't really celebrated across the whole school. It kind of depended on your class. If your teacher was musical, then you got a lot of music. If you didn't have a teacher that was that way inclined, then you kind of didn't get as much experience, certainly with like instruments and things. So when it was suggested that we had like an actual music space, it was really, really exciting. And the kids love it. It's like a kind of like magical little oasis for them, because like I say, it's not an area that they pass every day, because it is sort of on the back end of the school, so it makes it more of an event, and they get really excited. And especially when with my little ones, when they come in, it is like a big magic space, and they see all the instruments and they're just like and they just want to like touch everything. So that's really, really important, and I think it sort of highlights the importance of music at the school, so it's not like an afterthought.
Yeah, brilliant. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms. I just want you to think, what do you notice when you look at that? What does it make you think of? What's happening in your school in terms of space? And then just if you have any questions, and we'll come back in probably, 5 to 8 minutes and just then have a little conversation about it. I hope that's okay. Charlotte's going to put us into spaces now. Hello. Do we have then any questions? I know I chatted a bit to Paul and Lisa and to Jean, but is there any questions coming from the other participants, Jane or Anne?
Yeah, we used to have a room that was used for music at our school. I teach nearly all of the music across my school, which is at Bilkey, and it's a very old building, and unfortunately I don't have that room anymore. It was great when we did have it, but it's needed for other things at the moment. So we've had to store instruments kind of separately, but if anybody knows of any creative ways to get grants to maybe create spaces elsewhere, that would be really useful. It's difficult, isn't it, for schools to get grants for things. It's much easier if you're a charity or doing something as an independent entity. Yeah,
I totally agree. Culture Bridge, maybe they can do some research on grants for spaces. But there is a lot of Lisa, you're doing building stuff at Cragside at the moment.
Yes, yeah, and that's the Inspire By. So that is overhauling a space and then there's a creative aspect to that as well, but also community sort of aspect. We want to be bringing in the community. But yeah, that's the space I was talking about in the breakout group. So it's an outdoor space, but it will be, if all goes to plan, it'll be canopied and there will be a performance space. So it is using it flexibly, basically, for things like music lessons. It might be drama, it could be productions, open air productions, but also then being utilised, by the community, so that then we aim to become a sort of, creative hub within the high heating area would be. That's the aim. But yeah, we are looking at that, but it's expensive.
Yeah,
not cheap.
Rob, have you got any advice for teachers who it's not about budget for space, it's that we haven't got any space at all? As you know, many primary schools are so small that they're kind of transient. They're like traveller music teachers, where they're using the hall, they're using spaces that are heavily used for other functions, and it makes life really difficult, doesn't it?
It does. I think what's important though is, and it's probably a bit of advocacy work with head teachers and trying to get them on side. But when children and young people see that a subject's valued, right, they're far more likely to engage in it. So if you do have a hall, and it is the dining hall, it's that thing of like, if the head teachers is insistent music is a priority, you need to be given this whole space at that time to do your subject. That in itself is demonstrating value to the rest of the staff in the school. And you do ruffle some feathers along the way, but you know, I'm very fortunate at Ravenswood, the work's in a brilliant space, but I teach in classrooms, particularly at the moment. I teach in halls. I taught a lot in a dining hall where there was always food on the ground. And the behavior was always most challenging in that school, in that hall. So it doesn't necessarily, I'd say it's not necessarily having an amazing space, but it's about feeling like you're not having to fight for that space. And I think it's important for schools to acknowledge, particularly if you're working with Perry's or, you know, music service or artists, that if you're giving them the sort of, if it's like, oh, well, we can squeeze you in there, or we'll try and fit you in there, you're sort of saying that there's that sort of unconscious message coming across, which is you don't value it. And if it, you know, I think it's just having that thought and understanding that if you give an artist a great space to work in, it's going to have a positive impact on engagement and the results that come out. That's the, you know, and it's challenging. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I was going to ask Sinead a question, but just to comment on what Rob's just said. I mean, I think the space at Ravenswood is absolutely fantastic and is kind of almost the ultimate in where you would want to be if you had the space and wanted to create a special music room. But we know, and the point's just been made, that space is a premium in lots of schools. So it's kind of how you value music. And I think I wanted to ask Sinead, because you mentioned that you said a little bit about what music used to be like, that it was about, you know, people who paid for their music and those that got tuition with Perry's. And if you had a teacher that was particularly interested or talented, then you got more music than the rest of the school. Can you just tell us a little bit about how this has transformed that, has changed that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of like a two-way thing. I think it's Rob and the space. So at Ravenswood, there was always a big culture of singing. We're very lucky to have some very talented musical people who kind of took on that role for the whole school. So singing in assemblies was always big. But then when it came to actual music lessons, because there was, say, the 2 or 3 teachers, we're a big school, we're 3 formentary, so there's 21 different classes. There'd be like 3 main teachers who were brilliant at teaching music, and then the rest of the staff either didn't have the confidence or the knowledge to do it. It was really tricky then to get the spread of music across the whole school. And so singing was always really big, but then how do you engage those kids in assemblies that aren't into singing or don't think it's cool or just want to sit in the back and talk? So by having this music room and bringing Rob in as well and making music, like Rob's saying, putting the importance back onto music and making the kids realize that it's not just a lesson where you get to mess around and it's not like real work like maths, like putting the emphasis on it being an option really for a career as well, because I don't think a lot of our kids would ever have thought of being like musicians, like maybe it's like a pop singer, but not thinking about how you can actually make a living from music. I think just again putting that like importance on the space has really highlighted that. And again for staff members as well, because I'm sure a lot of the teachers will think, oh God, I've got so much to cram into the week. If I miss music this week, that's not really going to matter. I've got like 12 maths things to do in a big, right? And again, it was changing that mindset of the staff that, hang on, no, music is equally as important as maths or geography or history, and it's not one of those things that you can pick up and drop off, or if you've got a spare 5 minutes, it's no, this is going to be ingrained in the whole school and the curriculum. And you've got that space, you've got the support and the area to do it in, because I think again that was a lot of the sort of excuses from staff as well. Oh, I don't have the space, or we didn't get the instruments because they were too far away and I didn't have time to pick them up. It's like, well, no, you've got the ability to go somewhere now, so no excuses, basically.
Great, thanks.
Shall we move on to the next part?
But I meant to say as well that I'd be perfectly happy for the Mad Hatter to join us, Jane.
Oh yeah.
Me too. I love
I'm a little bit
fancy dress.
jealous that we don't get to see the Mad Hatter costume.
Oh, you have to promise not to laugh.
No,
We had Little Bo Peep or somebody last time in a session, Jean and I.
you
So
did.
we have seen some costumes. It's been
Right,
cool.
but don't judge me.
We would never do
Yay.
Hey,
that.
that's brilliant.
Amazing.
What a good
Great
effort.
costume.
That is brilliant.
I'm taking the hat off, but the hair looks worse actually now that the hat comes off because it's been.
That is awesome.
Oh,
Well done.
Jane.
Well done, you.
Jane,
Yeah.
hi. Can you just say hi to Tony? I used to work at Bilkey for 10 years.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
That must have been away.
Yeah, say hi,
Right.
it's Lisa. Yeah. Anyway.
Great, yeah.
that's
Come on,
lovely.
Lisa, don't hijack the session.
Right, okay, I'm going.
So we're going to just have a little chat about how we've worked together on progression maps in music and the curriculum, particularly with this new focus from Ofsted, looking at a broad and balanced curriculum. Sinead, do you want to just kick off how you started that whole process, and then I'll.
So as you probably guessed from our music room, our head teacher is really invested in music. He's a big fan of music. We started thinking about the music curriculum probably when I came here, which is a very long time ago, probably about 5 or 6 years ago. We started looking at our music progression in the curriculum and what exactly everybody was teaching, because like I said, there was definitely a split between the teachers who could and the teachers who couldn't, and I don't think that had ever really been addressed. So we were actually put into groups. We looked at the curriculum as a whole in terms of the arts and also like geography, history. So we were put into groups as teachers to basically look at our subject and think about what was being taught where and how it was being taught, to see if we could kind of link up and make sure that everybody was teaching the same thing. Because even in particular year groups, again, it was dependent on the experience and the confidence of the teacher. So again, even though all the children were in the same year group, they were being taught very different things. So we were put into groups and we looked through the national curriculum and had to decide what was being taught where and how, because obviously the curriculum's quite woolly. It's in the key stages and the phases. So we were trying to pull out what would work and where. Then we were lucky and Roberto came along, and I think that helped a lot of staff initially, because when Rob first came, I'm sure you won't mind me saying, but the emphasis was really taken away from a lot of the staff, and it was like, right, this is when you're having Rob for this term. Basically, you don't really need to think about music, and Rob sort of took it over. And then after the first sort of year, we were like, well, hang on, this isn't really working, because each year group got Rob for a term. It was like, well, we've still got 2 other terms to teach music. What is happening there? People were still feeling very unconfident. Some people were using schemes of work like Music Express. I don't know if anyone's used that, which is okay to dip in and out of, but to do that every week was getting really monotonous for the children. So then we kind of had a brainstorm again, and I came in to be music coordinator. Was it 2 years ago, Rob, when I started having your life?
Well, we sort of like last year didn't count, so it's probably 3 years, isn't it? I don't know.
Oh yeah. So I got the responsibility of becoming music coordinator, and things at Ravenswood always kind of work top down. So Key Stage 2 was always thought about, but there wasn't anything really thought about at the bottom end of school. So we had a lot of choirs, a lot of music sessions, but it was all based in Key Stage 2. So obviously I was Key Stage 1 early years experience. So I decided to shake that up and change that. I've lost my train of thought. Yes, sorry. So curriculum. So we worked together in teams basically, but then I worked alongside Rob, and we really looked at what the teachers didn't feel comfortable with or didn't feel confident with what we should be teaching and how we were going to sort of teach that. And we came up with like a sort of music sequence. So first, as a staff, we came up with a music sequence for what the kids should learn in early years, going all the way through to year 6. I then worked alongside Rob to look at the progress of music. So Rob came in with his ideas of what he would do, and then we went back to individual year groups for them to fill in the gaps and say, right, Rob's doing this, this is what we need to do, and this is how we're going to do it. And then that obviously worked in really nicely when the deep dives came in, because we were like, whew, we know we've got that covered. So then it's my kind of role as music coordinator to make sure that every year group is knowing what they need to teach and when, basically.
I think what I noticed is that we didn't go in saying what are teachers not able to do. It started off with what can teachers teach, which parts of the curriculum do teachers feel comfortable with. Let's emphasize that. I think quite often teachers are scared, particularly if you've not had musical training, which is very few teachers. They feel like it's a scary subject to do. Having said that, it's far harder to teach phonics. It's far harder to teach a kid how to read than it is to teach them how to play music once you get into it. So there's an awful lot that teachers can cover comfortably in the curriculum. So that was the starting point. And then it was like, so where are the gaps? And that's where the school uses a music specialist, is to look at the gaps, but then also which parts could the music specialist support the classroom teacher to sort of gen up and take on those elements. So it's a case of teaching for a term and then trying to support the classroom teacher with ideas to follow it on for the next 2 terms. Yeah. So it's always about upskilling, and it's not about, okay, you know, for me, it's really important that if I were to leave that school, music wouldn't just disappear, that actually a lot of the knowledge would stay within the school, and that they would be able to then find another specialist, but would have the confidence to really think about who that was. It's that I think longevity is really important.
Yeah, because I think, sorry, just going back to when you initially came, I think that's where we kind of got it wrong. Yeah. And those teachers that weren't comfortable or confident with music kind of treated it as if they kind of had cover for the lesson, and I know some of them didn't even stay in with you. So then it was addressing that, well, hang on, that's not what you're there for. It's supposed to be a collaboration. It's supposed to be CPD. You're not like a cover teacher. And it's working with you to get those skills, like you said, to then carry it on themselves afterwards. Because there was a time at the very early stages where some classes were getting music for that term, and then it was kind of forgotten about. Oh, it's fine, Rob's done that. We don't need to cover that anymore. So we had to do a lot of work to make it more of a collaboration, and like you say, teaching those skills so that people could carry it on.
Jean, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to ask a question and make an observation. I think really interested in the starting point being what can teachers teach rather than what they can't, because I think the arts in general, and I think, you know, music, dance and art to a certain extent, suffer from the kind of the assumption teachers make about not being able to do it. I don't have those skills, therefore I can't do it. They would never say that about phonics. They would never say that about maths. They would go away and find out and learn and find the knowledge that they needed, but they don't do that about the arts. And I think that lack of confidence is something that I'm sure a lot of schools have to try and address. And I just think that approach as a starting point, having done your year and realised that actually we've got a specialist, but the specialist's doing everything and the staff aren't taking anything on board, I think to use that as a starting point is really interesting. So you're equipping them and giving them things that they can do and building on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could definitely see the change in staff after the first year when they were getting a little bit more confident and having seen Rob do things. And it's kind of like when you do things with the kids, so you've got to give them that time to get their heads around it and practice. And I think that's been like one of the best things with having like someone coming in, is just having that time to work alongside somebody. And because you can go on a course and you get loads of good tips, but then you're sort of thrown in on by yourself, whereas at least this is like a whole term you get to have weekly sessions with, and I think that's worked really nicely.
In terms of some of the other points then, in terms of like, so progress, I think it's important. Maybe we could have a little look at the maps. I'll share the what we've sort of created, and I'm not at all saying like when I was sort of prepping this presentation, I've looked over them and I think there's still a lot that I'd probably want to add in or challenge. But if we have a little look at those, can everybody see those? So this is the one at the top. I'll not zoom in too much. This is this. So I'm not sharing the whole sequence because I don't think it's appropriate, because I think the school has a sequence that they use for each subject. So what they've done is they've tried to look at music mapped against the so if you looked at English, maths, science, geography, each of them will follow a sort of similar type of map. So that's why it looks like this. But the focus was obviously a focus on singing, rhythm, instruments, composition, performance, and appreciation. And what's important about this is it's what I would call smart when I'm doing Sage Gateshead work. So it's specific, it's measurable. So we've got elements where we can really see whether progress is taking place. So if you look at this under rhythm, use body parts to make rhythms, to begin to read notation, okay, introduce symbols. So this is something that I can measure. Can kids understand tar, kiddie? And these are like, well, I'll give a bit more detail further down. But in each part of that, it's not woolly at all. These are actual things that are taking place in school. So recognizing composition, recognizing pace, pitch, and volume, and they'll compose a 4-beat rhythm. That's something that we can see and demonstrate. I could go into year 1 tomorrow and ask, and I reckon probably 80% of children in year 1 could compose a 4-beat rhythm using crotchets and quavers and would be able to clap it back to you pretty accurately. It's like that sort of level. It's not massive. In terms of teaching music, we could go into so much detail. That's impossible for a primary school to try and cover every single element of music. You'd have a massive headache. So what I really like about this is it is simple. It's very simple. Certain things that I would bring in knowledge from sort of the cultural sector is that we're doing a lot around sort of looking at decolonializing the music curriculum, looking at music in terms of inclusivity. So one thing that I would challenge is when I went through the appreciation, it's a lot of, you quite often fall into this trap of presenting white male Western composers who died 200 years ago. And that's no good for wanting to encourage people of color or BAME communities to get into music, and it's certainly no good encouraging girls and young women to get into music. But these are things that Sage Gateshead we get challenged on constantly. So in terms of cultural sector knowledge, that's what we should sort of see coming in. So I don't know why that is, but for instance, and another interesting one is the use of pronouns, which is coming across a lot within the cultural sector, where you would never see that currently in the school, in the education sector. So we would, if this was a meeting happening at Sage Gateshead or Baltic, you will see people talking about their pronouns at the start of meetings. So I think these are just sort of interesting things where we should be learning from each other and having conversations. So this is the top one, is what Ravenswood sort of created. As a music specialist, I was asked, and it's really great that they did this because it hasn't happened in many schools, and it was an absolute headache for me. But they forced me to map out what I teach in school, and really demonstrate. And this is important for, certainly if I was doing a session for, looking at training up music practitioners going into schools, is that there's a lot of money spent on when you're bringing in a specialist into school, and the head teacher has to justify that to your governors, right? So they have to, and they use the 3 I's. So what's the intent? How is it being implemented? And what's the impact of that work, right? And this is, I would encourage all class-based teachers, all music coordinators, if you're working with Perry's, if you're working with music services, you should be asking them for this information, and they should be comfortable in supporting you with that information. So in each, I've only showed you year 1 here because it's massive and just one element of it. But this is the activity. I will do a hello song. These are the types of warm-ups I'll use. I'll use rhyming songs. This is the skill that's being developed. So we're developing singing, obviously, we're developing pitch, we're developing confidence in soloing. And then is the knowledge, is it explicit knowledge or is it implicit? Is it something that we're going to, sometimes in terms of demonstrating progress, if it's implicit learning, that's a lot harder. If it's explicit, we can just create a video. And then this is the question that's really important for me. And this came from working with Ben Wassell at Chillingham Road. He came into my session and said, why are you doing this? And he didn't just say it to me. He picked a child at random and said, so why are you singing a hello song? Why is it important to sing hello songs? And quite often when we're teaching, we just fall into this trap of doing it because it's in the national curriculum. As a musician, as a professional musician, as an artist, it's important that children know why they're doing it. What's the point? When I learned pentatonic scale at school, nobody told me why we do it. All we were told is this sounds Chinese. Not only is that could be argued as being racist, it's not helpful. What's helpful is to know that the pentatonic scale is naturally being created by humans. What's important is that the pentatonic scale is probably found in 90% of music from around the world. It's there because it's easy to sing. It's a comfortable scale to sing, right? It's catchy. These are the things that we want to pull out. And then in terms of looking at progress, I've sort of touched on this, but here's what we've done in terms of rhythm notation is what would we see? So I would expect in reception, I don't really do work in reception, but they'll do a lot. It's just sort of intrinsic, a lot of singing, a lot of chants, a lot of rhymes. When we get into year one, we start to use sounds. We don't necessarily look at notation, but we definitely use a lot of the sounds. And then year two, children will be able to read and clap these rhythms. In year three, they'll add rests and so on. So these are things, again, that are like, you can see, you can demonstrate, you can feel, you know that they're happening. Although there's a massive element to understanding rhythm, this is just one part where we can actually demonstrate progress. What I'd like us to do is, I'm just going to ask Charlotte to put us into breakout rooms again, and we'll just have a little conversation on that. And just, again, just thinking about what do we notice? What are our thoughts? What's happening in your school? And what questions you have on that? Is that okay, Jean?
Yeah, before we go, Jess has just put something in chat. It might be worth just answering it before we go into the chat room. Sinead, how long do your music lessons last?
Rob, do you get, sorry, I'm in reception, we don't get the lovely Rob. Do you get 45 minutes or half an hour with the kids?
Key stage one, we're working half an hour a week, but quite often when you chat to the classroom teacher, they'll be feeding in the activities throughout the week. Key stage two, it's like a 45-minute session once a week. And but we're looking at a free-form entry school here with, if you go into Chilly Road, there's not a lot happening in key stage one, but key stage two are probably receiving an hour a week. Up into year 6, they're receiving 2 hours a week. And then if they're joining after school clubs and singing in choir, it quickly adds up to about 4 hours of music a week based on just buying in one music specialist. So if you compare that to other programs that are happening, right, you actually realize that with not much investment, your children, if you're upskilling staff, if you have staff willing to take on choirs, lunchtime ensembles, you can have your students who are wanting to learn music can have 4 hours a week quite comfortably. And with that much tuition in primary school, they most certainly can go on to have a career as a professional musician, I would argue.
Yeah, because obviously each year group gets Rob for a term. So when Rob's not there, there's the expectation that you have at least half an hour lesson of music a week. But then this is all pre-COVID, because obviously that messed everything up. We do whole phase assemblies, singing assemblies as well, and then on top of that there's singing expected in classrooms as well. And then there's some other teachers who do bits of instrumental. I know the chime bars and things, in pocket trumpets, they come in through the school. So minimum half an hour, but it's never just that. It's especially like lower down the school, we sing all the time.
You've got your key stage 1 choir, you've got your key stage 2 choir, and that'll be based on open invite, whoever wants to. But if we notice, one thing that I'm asked to do is when I'm teaching music is there children that are standing out in terms of maybe passion or in terms of skill level, and they would be signposted, and we would do everything we can to try and make sure they're in the choir. And then also we have an after school ensemble, which is the same thing. We have a lunchtime ensemble and an after school ensemble. And the lunchtime ensemble is like development. So if we feel like someone's got the passion but can't quite perform or isn't comfortable or confident, they'll be encouraged to join the lunchtime ensemble. And then and those that are really progressing well will be invited into the after school ensemble. And again, that's like a clear demonstration of progress, which Ofsted would be interested in. It's like, how are you ensuring that that children are progress? What are the progression routes? And then after that, it's a case of being connected with your ensembles through your hubs or through Sage Gateshead. So I've had quite a few, obviously because of my dual role, working, you know, independently in schools and also working at Sage Gateshead. If I see a young person that I feel they're not, you know, particularly if they're from a socioeconomically diverse area, it would be you should audition, and I would have a chat and a conversation with the family around them auditioning to get into the CAT or the Young Musicians program at Sage Gateshead, or chatting to the local music service and saying, look, what opportunities they are. And we should be, if you've got Perrys in school, they should be supporting you with that, and you can challenge them on that and ask and say, who's showing potential here? Who do we need to nurture, support? If that
You
makes...
forgot the most important club, Rob. Glee Club, Baby
Yes.
Glee. It's
Baby
a
Glee.
performance art club for the littlies, and it is amazing.
I've not been invited to that one yet.
Yeah, because you're not here on Mondays, you'll have to come down.
Not good enough to join Baby Glee. Should we go into breakout room, Charlotte, and just have a little chat on that? Has everybody made it back? Do we have?
I've got a burning question, Rob. It's quite a difficult one, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Right.
So Sinead was talking about this idea, and I saw a lot of people nodding when she was saying you bring in a specialist and people see them as cover, and they're like, great, get in, I can go and do something else. The specialist has got the music covered. And you talked about this idea of almost co-coaching and co-facilitating, that you want the teacher to be with you. But if you're teaching a class and you've got responsibility for that class, that's quite difficult for you to co-coach somebody at the same time. So what strategies have you come up with to help schools to do that? So for example, you know, if I was a coordinator and you were co-coaching some of my teachers, I'd know that I'd have to bring those teachers together and give them an opportunity to talk about what they'd learned and to engage in some professional dialogue around their learning from you, from that specialist. So what's your experience of supporting co-coaching, and what advice have you got for schools who are using a specialist to make the most of that learning opportunity?
So first of all, I think there's nothing wrong with using a specialist to cover PPA. I get a lot of work that way, and that's again about saying PPA time should be valued, and why not use a specialist in those points. Having said that, you should look at a dialogue. So I know certain schools I work in will say, could you lead, instead of the after school ensemble this week, would you do a CPD session for teachers? So that's one element. What I'm doing in Ravenswood, and it's hard, I don't always, it's Clive, the head teacher, who pushes me into this place. So he'll challenge me and he'll say, what are you doing? He asks the question, what are you doing to upskill the teachers? So that's one element. I have the pressure on my back to do it. But it's inviting the teacher to go, okay, we've done this now for 3 weeks. Do you fancy leading the warm-up this week? It's that thing of going, when you're singing a song, it's like having that challenging situation where you sing the song and you ask the teacher to take it on. But it's about, I suppose it's about being sensitive, and it's about, like, I'm always reading a school. I'm always trying to read and understand a teaching practice, the teacher I'm working alongside. And I'm trying to think, well, what elements could they use? Because, like, you know, it's this idea, you can't possibly teach everything on top of the amount of in-depth that you have to go into with literacy and numeracy. We've got to be realistic here, but it's about thinking, well, what 5-minute activities could happen. And I think actually, if we wanted to be totally on the money here with Culture Bridge, would be to provide 5-minute activities, arts activities that can be woven in throughout the day. There's lots of research that demonstrates strong understanding of rhythm. Children who have a strong rhythmic development also have strong reading skills. There's a lot of scientists, neuroscientists that research this, that rhythm and reading sit in the same part of the brain. So if you know, quite often, like, so rhythm and dyslexia are both associated in the same part of the brain. That you could be going, okay, if we're going to do reading, why don't we do 5 minutes of clapping activities before we do any reading? Before we do any writing, why don't we feed in a little bit of reading rhythm notation? Rhythm and music is all maths. So when you're looking at, it's that sort of thing of like giving teachers these little ideas of try this out with your class. Just try these little, it's like little bite-sized chunks. The other element is using, a great thing out of lockdown was I got asked to create loads of tutorials for schools. So I created, I don't know, about 35 little 10-minute YouTube videos. And what's been so beautiful is the amount of teachers who I don't even work with, I don't even come across, have come up to us in the corridors and said, "Oh, Rob, I've been using that cup video. Oh, Rob, I've been using that little video." And they're there, you know, they're just so open about not being the expert, and are just like, look, we'll just let this tutorial take place and I'll just sit down with the class and join in. And Claire, we were chatting about that. The teacher should have the enthusiasm. The teacher should be able to see, okay, are they getting this? Can we keep the play button on? No, they're not. Look, pausing it, giving an extra little explanation. It's those sort of, it's just like understanding bite-sized, manageable, you know, tasks that anybody can take on.
Yeah.
Does that help?
I think though as well, what was important at our school was we actually did an evaluation with staff. So we asked staff like how they felt about teaching music, if they were more confident, if there was anything they thought they needed help with, if there was anything they thought Rob could do differently. And some of them were a bit brutal, weren't they, Rob? But it was important that everybody sort of had the say. And then I sat with Rob and the head teacher and we discussed it, and then we came up with ways to sort of like fix things and make it work better. So it wasn't like Rob's just left to his own devices, or that like everything's coming from the head teacher. It was everybody sort of had a say and got involved in that. And I think that was important for the staff as well, to realize they could have a dialogue with you. And I think doing it the evaluation way, the evaluations came to me, so then they didn't have to have like awkward conversations. And because I think what's really nice with Rob is everyone gets on with him. I think you've got to be approachable, and the fact that people did see you as like a nice person and like a bit of a friend at work would then mean that they weren't as confident to say if they didn't think certain things were working in the lessons. So to have that sort of bridge person in between to act as like the liaison, I think that was really important for staff as well.
Yeah. Now that beautifully leads us on to the next slide. So I'll do that, just covering, Paul's just asked a question, so it's just about the sounds are like based on Kadai sounds, just so you know. So when I'm talking about kiddie, you probably saw that on the slides. But then I've adapted some of them based on, for various reasons. But the made up sounds are a great way of teaching rhythm. Right, next slide. Can everybody see that okay? So we'll just do a little bit of a ramble on partnership working and communication, which Sinead just touched on there. So the work started off, and I'd say this is really important for all of the work I do, is I spend probably about 2 hours with a head teacher before anything happens, where we chat about what's happening musically in the school, what are the strengths in the school musically, and then sort of understanding where the gaps are musically. And that should be, I really encourage a head teacher or a music coordinator that when you're working with Perry's, like visiting musicians or any artist, that you have that conversation with them. And for me as an artist working in schools, it's so important to understand that every single school you go into has a different like personality. You know, I could actually probably like create a cartoon character for every single school I've been in. And quite often we think, certainly at Sage Gateshead, the rest of Sage Gateshead quite often just pigeonhole. It's probably why I got given the job as schools program leaders, that they pigeon schools as this massive group. They're all the same. Whereas actually anybody who works in schools, like, they're so different. The banter that happens in staff rooms is so different. The sort of the head teachers are so different. The governing bodies are so different. The buildings are so different. And as a result of all of those differences, the children, the communities that attend those schools are so different. You get these really distinct personalities. And for me, that's massively important to understand. And then what you can have is this really open and honest conversation with each other. I'm very clear about what I'm not going to cover, but equally, I try to be as flexible as possible. So I try to go, okay, yeah, I'll try and make that happen. But there's been points where I've gone, okay, I'm not the guy to do this. And I signpost them to other musicians and to get other people in school. So I'd say that's a really important conversation to have. The other thing I have is this continuous dialogue. So quite often head teachers are busy, but whenever I arrive in school, I'll try and find the head teacher and just to have a 5-minute catch up. What's happening in school, particularly at the moment with COVID? It's like, what cases are you dealing with? How much pressure are the staff under? Is it just giving that chance for a teacher to go, actually, Rob, hang on a second. This got flagged up. The amount of times I've actually, a parent said something to a child said something to their parent and the parents fed it back. And it means that I can receive that dialogue. And it's open. So Sinead, would you just give a more in-depth conversation about what we did in terms of evaluation? Because I think this is a really important thing for classroom teachers to take on with any visiting artist.
Yeah, so like I said, when Rob initially came in, there was the thought that was it. I don't have to do music anymore. It's taken care of. Then there was the change in that. So there was a lot of talk with staff who weren't confident about helping them with their skills. And there was a lot more chat from the SLT team about how we'd be looking at what the staff were doing when Rob wasn't there as well. So I think people got a bit nervous. And then having worked, because Rob's been here quite a long time now, and with people being in the same year groups, I think they were starting to see more of an overview of how Rob's teaching was impacting on the staff and the children for the rest of the year. And I'm sure you won't mind me saying, Rob, but you were quite free flow and coming in a bit off the cuff. Although you had it all in here, that wasn't kind of being translated to the staff. It's just different ways of working. So then staff weren't sure the impact of what Rob was doing and how it was all sort of linking together. So there was some chat about, well, what's the difference between what's happening in year 1 and year 3? And although Rob had that overview in his head, the staff not coming from the same place and having the same knowledge and skills and things weren't seeing that, and there wasn't a true overview of where the kids were coming from and where they were going to. And a few staff were thinking, well, it's the same thing happening again and again, and not understanding why you're seeing this sort of build up. So we looked at the music progression through school, but then we also chatted with staff about their thoughts about what was happening in the lessons. And I think staff felt, because they didn't have the knowledge and the skills that Rob did in terms of music, that they couldn't give him feedback in terms of being a teacher and having a class, in seeing how topics interweaved with music and things like that. And it was kind of one-sided. And so it was kind of, then we decided as like a school and a staff that actually you can say things to Rob, or you can give suggestions or hints, or you can ask him questions, or you can feedback things from particular topics. It's not like a standalone thing that you don't have any control or any sort of link into. It can be more collaborative. And so we got feedback forms from all the staff, and we asked for suggestions of things they would like. And I don't know whether you'd seen a change since we did that. I think people have felt more open to speak to you and Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say it really empowered teachers. I think there was this initial nervousness of crap. I'm not sure if they realized I was going to see the feedback.
Initially they didn't, and then I wasn't sure. I thought I was going to dilute it, because obviously some people were quite harsh, because
Oh, yeah.
yeah, everyone's got the teachers in their schools. So when I initially put it out, I was under the impression that I was going to sort of relay it back to Rob, and then Clive, our head, was like, no, just give him the sheets. And I was like, what? So then I had to then go back to staff and be like, just so you know, it's an open dialogue, and some of them did get like a bit, but I've said this and this. And I was like, yeah, but the thing is, I think the relationship with school and the relationship with you, Rob, we knew that that wasn't going to be like you storming out of school or there being any sort of confrontation, that you would take that well. Yeah. And I think if you had a new sort of music specialist coming in, maybe wouldn't use that approach. It definitely had to be because we knew you and you wouldn't take it personally.
I mean, we asked, didn't we? We said, I'd even said myself, it's pointless somebody telling me I'm doing a good job. I won't learn from being told I'm doing a good job. We asked for critical feedback, and we asked to, you know, and so I sort of knew that half of the teachers did just say he's doing a great job, let him continue. But actually there was a lot of learning for us. I am off the cuff, and I had to have a dialogue with the head teacher, which is a lot of my best ideas have come to me 2 minutes before I start teaching a class. Ideas just come into my head, and I don't know where they come from. I'm always thinking about my work, but no, I don't always write everything down. And I had to say to Clive that, look, I'm up to a point. I'm willing to give you everything that I'm doing. I'm willing to give you like a lot, so you can see the depth in terms of how I look at progress. But there was some certain points where I had to say I'm not comfortable with that. If you want to take me off the cuff, we might as well just delete 50% of the ideas that I've written down here, because they've come to me 2 minutes before I start teaching. And I think we have to weigh up that I know head teacher at Hotspur Primary School that I used to work with, he used to like the fact that children could see a different learning style, a different teaching style. He liked how informal I was, and he thought that it was important for them to see that actually you can have this style of education, but you can also have this style of education. So, but the most important thing was the dialogue. And what did happen after that is the teacher who gave me probably the most heavy criticism, we have an amazing dialogue now where I'm not actually taught in her class yet this year, but she's always talking to me about, oh, Rob, I've been doing this. Oh, Rob, yeah, I'd like you to do this. It's actually the first couple of, maybe the first month or so, it was a little bit, I've had that feedback. But now it's actually, and I'm really excited about teaching in a class, because I know I can up my game, and I know she's going to see that, and she's going to be like, oh, wow, this is great.
Yeah, I think as well for staff, it was important that they knew that they could have that conversation with you. And like we said, like, you aren't trained in like teaching as in like in a classroom and planning and all of that sort of stuff, and you don't know what everyone's teaching, you don't know the topics that have been or coming up. And so for them to feel that they had the ability to talk about that and to make changes, and to not feel, oh, he's the specialist, he knows what he's doing, but I'm not particularly happy, or like even they can have ideas as well. They might see you doing something, and then that could spark an idea with them. And I think it was just really important as a school that people knew that was fine and that was okay, and that it wasn't you coming in and doing something, that it's supposed to be collaboration.
Yeah. So again, should we just split into a couple of rooms and just, see what our thoughts on that, in terms of, I suppose the thing to think about is when you're working with artists in your school, and it doesn't necessarily have to be music, what sort of dialogue do you have? And do you feel confident to have a strong dialogue? And how can we sort of improve that dialogue? I think they're the things to think about. But is there any sort of last little questions that have come from that you want to ask, or any points that came out that you want to share?
I don't know. I think we were talking about the importance of that conversation in our breakout room. I don't know whether Adam or Anne want to say something about what they're taking away, in a sense, from what you've described?
Yeah, so I was just saying to our group that it's important to, if you buy a specialist in, it's really important to have sort of make time to talk to teachers, to sort of talk about follow-up lessons and what they could do next. Just have that 10-minute conversation or 15 minutes and sit down rather than maybe writing an email, because that conversation is so much more beneficial. It could lead into dealing with misconceptions or getting the right follow-up or something we need to practice on. So just making 10 minutes at the end of that specialist, or grabbing them 10 minutes before, or just making time rather than trying to squeeze it in or writing an email later, just making sure you're clear on what's next.
Yeah, and you said you were actually going to take that away and start planning for that, didn't you?
Yeah, I think that's
Rob, do you know anything about, have you got any inside information about the new National Plan for Music and when it actually might be released, and was Sage involved in the consultation with that or anything? Have you got any heads up on what we can look forward to in that or not?
Just more of the
More
same.
bureaucracy.
I'll be really honest with you. So I started teaching music when I was 21, and back then we had a thing called the Music Manifesto, right? Which was all about the decline in children studying music at GCSE level, the decline in children wanting to study instrumental tuition, and we just keep going round this circle, and we blame everything else that's going on, right? Everything else. We'll blame EBAC, we'll blame Progress 8. The reality is, if we want to change music education, we need to have a really strong dialogue between the class teachers, the music coordinators, and the Perrys or the music specialists going into school. And it needs to be a really honest, open conversation where schools own their learning. Schools, that if you think how you've taught phonics and how that's changed over the last 15 years, or if you think coding, no one knew how to code or teach coding 15 years ago, whereas I've noticed Adam's got a coding display on the back of his board. It's changed, it's progressed. Schools have moved on and made music tuition hasn't changed, right? That's the reality. And we need schools to really take it on and to challenge it and to go, we're gonna make this happen, and we're gonna make it good. We're gonna make sure that every single child enjoys their music lessons, despite whether they're pupil premium or not. Everybody's gonna, have a great time. And that's what needs to happen. It needs to be a really strong dialogue. I wouldn't hold any sort of, I'm really sorry for being brutal about this, but I've seen so many plans for music education, and yet nothing seems to change. So,
but we can change it.
We can change it. Exactly.
Taking the reins and doing it yourself.
Exactly. The classroom teachers, you're the experts. You're the ones that you do. 500 years ago, everybody played music. 500 years ago, there was no such thing as musicians and non-musicians. We all just played music. We all sang. And it didn't matter whether we were professionals or not. That didn't matter. And slowly, we've just got to this point where we have musicians and we have audiences, and and it's just a simple case of it doesn't matter. I've got a rubbish singing voice. I hate it. Right? My wife is always saying I've got a bad voice, but I teach singing all the time. Right? And you just have to get over it and make it happen.
I don't know, Rob, do you want to mention Music Mark? Presumably if they're coordinators, they'll probably know all about Music Mark. If not, do you want to say a little bit?
Yeah, there's lots of stuff out there. So Music Mark, becoming a member of Music Mark could be helpful. Just one little quick thing I'll share is in terms of progress and progression maps. This is like they do give you. So this is a lovely little a framework for progression and musical learning. I can share this with you. This is like if you're a massive SWAT, you'll try and tick all these boxes, but it'll be hard for me to tick these boxes. But they just sort of go through the different elements to music across primary and secondary, and then they have this incredible map which is sort of looking at what you should be looking out for. But so I could share that. But Music Mark is a service. So where are they? If we go up to the top. So if you search for Music Mark, there's a lot of knowledge there, but also your hubs will all be members of Music Mark, and they can share this information with you. I'd say the most important thing is try and have a good dialogue in getting them to see, try and get as much from them as you can. Oh, my internet's unstable. Am I still here?
You just froze a little bit, but I think what you were saying was have a good dialogue with your music hub. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, really strong dialogue with your music hub. They're the ones that should be making and supporting you.
Well, we got.
If the internet's unstable, it doesn't matter. We're at 12 o'clock. That was brilliant.
We got so far.
Wow.
Brilliant.
He's frozen. Oh, he's back.
He's back.
Yeah, you're back.
The internet telling me I'm going on too much and it's time.
Rob, do you want to
shutting you up?
Rob, do you want to say a little bit about the last session in the mini-series, which is next Friday? If you're not booked on already, you can go on our website and have a look and book on. But do you want to just say what you'll be doing, Rob?
Yeah, so next Friday morning, I'm going to be doing some. So during lockdown, I had to rethink all of my teaching and think, how can I teach inclusively during lockdown? So I'm just going to share various ideas on how to teach music using your body cups. And these are things that I've now taken back into the classroom, and they've been really popular. Sometimes people are questioning whether it's still music, and I'm having to like defend that you don't have to be hitting samba drums to make music. But certainly the kids have absolutely loved these ideas because I think they've come from an informal place, and that in itself has made it sort of inclusive, exciting, and fun. So that's what I'm doing next Friday, if you can escape from class.
Thank you so much for coming on behalf of CBNE, and thanks for all the facilitators today as well. It was a great session.